Namaste and welcome to Live, Love, Engage. I am Gloria Grace Rand, and today we're going to be talking about leadership and inclusion with our awesome guest, who is someone coming right here from my state of Florida. He's actually just down the road from me a little bit. His name is Dr. Steve Yacovelli. And so first off, welcome to Live, Love, Engage, Steve.
Thank you, Gloria. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. I found out about you not too long ago and said, "Ooh, this is a good guy. I want to get on the program." So let me tell you a little bit about why I thought he would make a good addition to our show. He is also known as the Gay Leadership Dude, which I love that handle. And he's owner and principal of TopDog Learning Group, which is a learning and development, leadership, change management, and diversity and inclusion consulting firm based, as I said, here in Orlando, Florida, with affiliates across the globe. And he and his company have had the pleasure of working with a lot of amazing partners who they consider to be members of his pack. Companies like Fortune 500 greats like Walt Disney, Bayer Corporation, non-for-profits like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the American Library Association, universities like Ohio State and the University of Central Florida, and even small entrepreneurial rock stars like International Training and Development and GovMojo Inc. And they really enjoy helping their client partners to grow, develop, expand, and be successful with their corporate learning, change management, diversity, inclusion, and leadership consulting goodness. And with over 25 years of experience, Steve is actually that rare breed of professional that understands the power of using academic theory and actually applying it in the corporate setting to achieve business results, which is awesome. And I understand you're quite fond of dogs too, which kind of makes sense with the name of the company. So do you have dogs right now?
I do. They are now sequestered in the back bedroom. So in case the daily Amazon delivery shows up, we won't hear them, hopefully.
I know the feeling. I have actually one right next to me who snuck in here. And it's like, well, now you're in because the door's closed. So sorry, kiddo. But she's usually pretty quiet unless the delivery truck comes by. But anyway, I know the mission of our program is really to be able to help people to what I say is to live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically. And I know that is something that I believe that leaders certainly need to be able to do. But I wondered if you know or believe that maybe, because I'm not even sure, what do you think is like your, what is sort of the secret of great leadership? Engagement is part of that or not, but.
Well, and it's a great question. It's funny. I've had a gentleman ask me when I first launched my latest book, Pride Leadership, last summer. Not this past one, but the one pre-COVID, I guess you might say. And this gentleman said, "What's the secret to leadership?" I said, "There is one." He's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yes, there is." And I said, "If you take my 365-page book, boil it down to one page with one word, the key secret to leadership is trust." So if I'm a good leader and I can foster trust within my team, and team doesn't have to be just direct reports, it can be those around me, my bosses, my clients, whomever that is. If you foster trust, you're gold. So I said, one word on one page, that's the secret to leadership.
But please buy my book anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
Because I'm sure there's lots more gold in there.
There is.
Well, actually, and since you brought it up, why don't we go there and tell me a little bit more about the book?
Yeah. So, like I said, it's technically my third book. It's my first with a real publisher, which has been kind of exciting, different process. But, I've been in the leadership and diversity and inclusion space pretty much my whole career. Like you said, I did it while I was at Disney. I was at IBM for a while as internal people. Then I kind of went out on my own in 2008 as a full-time gig. And I still work with some big awesome clients, but you start to see leaders and a leadership pattern for those who are just like rocking and rolling and being awesome leaders, and the ones who are crashing and burning and not doing so well. Right. So, the little qualitative research nerd in me was kind of just observing and all this stuff. So gathering that data, if you will. And then I'm at a conference a couple years ago, And I'm sorting business cards going before a session. This woman's next to me actually doing the same thing. And she's like, what do you do? And I said, well, diversity, change management, blah, blah. I said, how about you? She's like, I'm a publisher. I'm like, you know what? There's a book in my head that needs to come out. She's like, let's get that book out. And so Jen became my publisher. And it really just got me starting to think about, putting these observations that I've had over the course of my career down into place. And so I started kind of mapping that. And then, not long after that, I started looking at some of the leaders around me. I do a lot of work, advocacy work, volunteer work, especially for the LGBTQ community, as well as others, just kind of helping foster equity and justice for the quote unquote others in the world. And so I through the lens, because leadership is top of mind, I started watching these leaders do what it is they do, and especially the successful ones. And then if you remember that TV show from back when, Sex and the City, if you remember that, and Carrie would always sit down at her computer and she's like, I couldn't help but wonder. And I actually kind of popped in my head. I couldn't help but wonder if, as an LGBTQ person, you have an opportunity to exercise leadership differently or in a unique way than our straight brothers and sisters. For example, out of the 30 some competencies I wanted to play with, I whittled it down to 6. And I'm just holding up my mouse pad, which just happens to sit here. It's branded with my 6 competencies. So they're authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture. And so let's talk about empathy for a second. If I'm an out gay man in the workplace, when we could go to work, that's leading very authentically in a different way than maybe my straight brothers and sisters are doing. So I'm not saying that, gay leaders are better than others, but I write in Pride Leadership that there's an opportunity for queer people to maybe exercise those leadership competencies that everybody really should be focusing their energy on. And that's kind of the basis of Pride Leadership. Allies love it too. Trust me. I've had that feedback a lot. So it's not just for gays anymore, but it's really went through to looking at these 6 competencies through that specific lens.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it really does make sense because yeah, people who are, who fall in one of those, communities, they really have had challenges, I think, in particular. I mean, just, personal lives. I mean, we've seen it earlier this year with the Black Lives Matter movement. And so when you've got sort of, a couple strikes against you, you've got to learn how to be able to maneuver in the business world or your personal life, and to be able to find ways to have common ground, which is something that we, need so much of in so many aspects of our life, frankly, not just the business world as well, but, well, and which I guess maybe you can speak on this is then how do, I would think, people who've gone through unique challenges, whatever it is, and this can even be people who have, physical disabilities as well, things like that. Correct. How does one become, how do you kind of come up with fostering resilience, especially when you're having to deal with maybe people who don't see eye to you, or who just have a different idea of, just how the world should work, and you're different,
Yeah. And it's such a great question, especially now. One of the things that I also say is a key to leadership, and it's one of those skills that I don't feel that people leverage it enough, is the concept of listening. But it's not just, it's, to paraphrase Stephen Covey, a great leadership guru, it's listen to understand versus listen to respond. Right. And far too often, especially in Western society and US society, we tend to just listen to give our 2 cents. And instead let's do that active listening. And actually I talk about that in my communication chapter, is, how can you kind of pull the thread of being empathetic through the action of being an effective and active listener. And so I think that's one of the great ways that we can start to really see from that differing perspective, especially if we're not really in that frame of mind. And I also acknowledge that one of the things that I really try to, is my soapbox, if you will, is fostering leaders to be more consciously inclusive. And so it really does mean getting into my own head first, trying to reduce some of those unconscious biases and maybe overt biases that I might have there, really work on myself first. And I kind of talk about that as a think in methodology, work on me first, and then I can start to what I call speak up on behalf of those around me, and then really act out, meaning look at the broader organization if we're talking talking workplace or society in general, what are ways we can foster inclusivity and belonging for everyone? And so it ultimately does start within my own head.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, have you, in some of the organizations that you work with, have you found some to be like more inclusive than others? And of the ones that were, what were some of their characteristics that really, and it's probably some of the things you've already mentioned, but what were some of that made them unique?
Yeah, when I work with clients, they bring me and my team in for a couple different reasons. Sometimes it's they just want to be more awesome, which is great. That's kind of fun. Some of them are like, oh, we're broken. And so we're kind of, which, hey, self-awareness is the number one awesome step. So that's cool.
Yeah.
But it's really, the very, very first thing that we go and look at is and we'll just focus it on the workplace. It's the workplace values. And so you do a couple different things with that. Most medium to big size businesses have some sort of value system in place. They have their vision, mission, all that good stuff. That's great. But so you look at that first and see what are the values. And a lot of times now, especially in the 21st century, people are saying, being inclusive, fostering a sense of belonging or something like that is part of that core. Fantastic. So then you actually ask the question, are these really the ones that are lived in the day-to-day life? And some organizations, they're like, yeah, this is how we operate. If you don't operate with those values, bye-bye, you're not really part of us. It's that social contract. But others are saying, yeah, that's really not what happens here. Or it's the global says this, but at our specific office here in XYZ location, we really kind of ignore that. And so now you have the problem and the opportunity, as I like to say, glass half full, is really the opportunity to start to rectify that. And that's what we try to do. But it starts with looking at the values. Are they the truly lived values within the business? And then you put it again to yourself. Are those values in line with something that you can be okay with as a human? We all have our own personal value system, whether we identify that or not. And so that's kind of what's also coming into play is values. I obviously don't want to talk politics, but that's the conversation I've been having. This is not about political leanings or all that good stuff. For me, what's happening in our society overall, and actually the world itself, is these differing value systems that are coming into play. And I think that's the common ground we can have that conversation on is, all right, forget labels and colors and all that weird stuff as far as things, but let's talk value system and what's the alignment we have. Awesome, let's leverage that. And where are those differences? Where can we maybe find some of that common ground?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it was you and I were talking earlier before we got started with the recording that I was having a discussion with my husband this morning that got a little heated over the politics and one of the things that I pointed out to him was that it's so frustrating because it just seems like everybody's so angry and they've just gotten so entrenched in their own beliefs, and if somebody doesn't believe what I believe, well then you're just no good and you're bad. And instead of finding a way to be able to bring love back into it, because we are still all human beings. And if we could find, some way to really recognize that, yes, you are a human being, you think and feel, and you bleed the same way I do, there should still be some way to be able to, come together somewhere on something.
I was text coaching my niece this morning, actually. And, we're very close. And so she's actually up in Pennsylvania. So there's, it's a very hot button kind of conversation. And she's like, I don't know how to approach this certain person that I love who sees things differently than I do. And I said, you know what, here's my leadership coaching advice. You can apply it to your world. Ask the question in the most neutral tone that you can have. How did you get to that perspective? And then again, go back to the listening thing, then just stop and listen. I said, they're going to share how they got there. And if they're not giving you the stuff, use part of my background's in counseling psychology. I'm like, use a term, that's interesting. Tell me more. And then just sit back. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. So I think listeners can actually do that too, is you in a sincere way ask, okay, that's not my perspective. How did you get there? And then listen and see where the conversation takes you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I know afterwards I was like, I did not handle that well. And I was like, oh, shoot. And I know I've had like that same conversation like with my coach in the past too about, and actually somebody even that I was talking with last week, I think who I'm actually going to be interviewing, who also talks about, that exact same thing is just tell me more. Let the other person
Yeah.
speak and just really be curious about
Mhm.
where their perspective comes from, because you don't know until you find out.
And I mean, hey, we're human. It's not easy sometimes. I totally admit it. I mean, I've been doing this stuff for 25 years and I still have to check myself at the door and physician heal thyself, and
Mhm.
so it's not easy, but if we work at it sincerely together, that's where the change and the commonality is going to happen. And I'm just, exercising that with my own family, and that's okay, and
Mhm.
and patience and truly wanting to understand is kind of the way to go. And that's not just from what's happening here. That's like a leadership success thing too, is when you have those conflicts within the workplace, ask the questions and then stop and listen and see, okay, how can I get there? Now, through the workplace lens, it's a little different because, well, ultimately, if the expectation on a value is, being inclusive and foster a sense of belonging, that's the business expectation, and an employee or leader isn't doing that, well, ultimately they either need to get in line, or that's, there's a when I worked at Disney, we always said there's an area of opportunity to have a conversation with yourself, and you can do that. And so when I work with these big Fortune 500s, I often have people come up to me and say, Steve, I don't necessarily buy into some of our corporate values. I said, that's fine. That's your value system. And I will never tell you what you should think,
Mhm.
but this is the expectation of you working here. That's what a value is. It's how you're supposed to do business. And if that's not in alignment with who you are, then you're not an indentured servant. You can find something else. Like, but I love this job. Well, that's a different conversation, isn't it? So
That's right. Yeah.
somebody has to change, and it's probably not going to be the Fortune 100 company we're having a chat about.
Absolutely. And that actually leads me to my next question, is I wanted to find out from you. So when you do work with a company, so are you concentrating on like advising the leadership on ways then that they can, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, to I guess broadcast this ways of being able to maybe change things up a little bit, and ways that people down the line in the rank and file can espouse these different values, or is it sometimes, do you actually work with like maybe departments as
Mhm.
opposed to department heads?
The answer is yes. It really depends on the engagement. Some of our clients were like the certified vendor for all their leadership training in North America. So we may write that curriculum, we may just like get it handed to us, and we kind of make it come to life. So that could be that part of it. Other things that we've been doing, especially in light of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and what's happened since this summer, and is really helping organizations figure out okay, we know there's problems. Steve, what can we do to at least try to work toward the solution? And whether that's, we go in and look at marketing, where are they looking at recruiting, or maybe it's, when I think about, the think in, speak up, act out, the act out part is, okay, look at the rest of your organization, your PowerPoints that you're doing that are the standard template. What are they representing visually? When they have a leadership image, is it a middle-aged white dude? That's not really super inclusive. Or your HR forms, are they including non-binary in the gender question, or is it just like male or female? And side note, I was actually, I'm going to a new doctor. I turned 50 this week. So I'm like, I probably need to get like that whole checkup thingy going on there.
Yeah.
And so I'm at this new doctor, and she's fantastic. But they gave me these HR forms, and they were I totally edited them. I redlined them for them, and all the intake. And I went in to meet the doctor. Now it's the first time I'm meeting her, and she's really, really cool. And my husband goes to her, so I kind of knew that she's pretty cool. And she's just like, by the way, thanks for your free consulting. And she starts laughing, and she's like, I'm embarrassed. We just moved offices. These were the old forms that we didn't mean to use. Thank you for sharing that. I said, but in all sincerity, that sent me a message potentially that, especially as a gay man, I'm like, how inclusive are you? And she's like, no, we're good. Obviously, this through your husband, but that was a really good message for us to be aware of, that we just pulled the wrong form, and that may not send the message of who we really are. And so I think we can do that as leaders, is look around us to say, how are we fostering inclusivity and a sense of belonging? And that is one of the things that we do with a lot of clients, because we're not inside their organization. We're not part of their corporate culture. And so we come in with that different set of eyes. Also, the ones that have a little bit more heightened sense of awareness to things that are maybe not being perceived as super inclusive, like the forum I just shared. And we kind of coach folks through that as well. So, and I've also been doing a lot of virtual keynotes, which is kind of cool in the age of Zoom. Luckily, my doctorate's actually in instructional technology and distance education. So Zoom is my jam. I'm kind of comfy here. And so it's a way to really make, to bring and support that conversation in these weird and wonderful COVID distance times.
Well, that's good. Yeah, absolutely. What types of who are you talking to and like doing what types of presentations?
So I have a series of several that I do. One's called Being a Consciously Inclusive Leader. It's based upon the work I do in my book and other things I've done. I focus on competencies of the top 6 competencies every leader should know and grow, which of course are the 6 in my book. And I'm very careful to it's not framed toward the queer employee there. It's actually meant for everybody. And that's what I do love about the story in Pride Leadership. It's not just a gay thing. It's every leader out there really should be more consciously inclusive to be more successful. Back to that trust word again. So it's talking to, sometimes it's just talking to entire Fortune 500 companies. And because of the age of Zoom, I can do a global thing. Several big pharma companies, several, I'll just say, local entertainment companies, but I can't really say who. But we're Central Florida, so you can probably narrow it down pretty easily. Looking at ways to have those conversations with specific departments, working with some employee resource groups, which are the demographic focus on a lot of big Fortune 500s, and also working with a lot of not-for-profit. I do work with several large not-for-profit organizations. They too are trying to get their handle around being more inclusive, and so been kind of sharing that story with them as well.
Have you found that there's any specific differences or not between like a nonprofit and a for-profit company, especially in this area?
The budget for programming, maybe. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm very good about knocking my prices down. But no, there really isn't. For nonprofits, some of them are trying to see how they can support their constituents, just like a large for-profit is looking about their employees. And so I think, structurally they're a little bit different, but I don't think the story or the message is really any different. It's how can we foster an organization, whatever that looks like, to be more consciously inclusive and embrace inclusivity and a sense of belonging. That's the typical story they're all kind of levitating toward in a good way. Yeah.
Now, I know, I think I deal with, at least primarily in my business, dealing with really smaller companies, more individual solopreneurs and things like that. So how would you, what would you tell them? Because I'm sure even as you're a solopreneur, you're going to want to start growing your company. You're going to wind up hiring people. So is there something that you can recommend to people as they're maybe even just starting a business to how to start thinking about this? And then I'm going to I'm going to let you talk, and I'm going to go let my dog out because she's scratching the dog. So I'm going to let you get to that.
No worries.
This is for a quick second.
I saw her in the background kind of doing her thing. So I know you can hear me, so we'll still go. So I guess there'd be 2 pieces of advice I would give to anyone who's kind of starting their business or really fostering it. The first is, even if you're a solopreneur, it is absolutely never too early to think about what corporate culture do you want to have. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate writing down a vision, mission, values, although that's a fantastic exercise to do if you've not done that. Identify your own personal values. And I actually, in Pride Leadership, I have a book, like an activity that does that. Or you could just Google, find my own personal values. It's not rocket science. But it's never too early to start that process. And so that's number 1. And then number 2, and this is more a business idea in the age of COVID-19, it's also never too early to COVID-proof your business. And so whatever you're doing is, what can you do that can be delivered through online? Matter of fact, and this isn't a shout out for my own business, but I had several people who are solopreneurs, peers of mine. They kept coming up to me. They're like, Steve, don't you have a doctorate in this like e-learning thing? I'm like, yeah, it's kind of my jam. They're like, how do I turn my coaching business into something more distant? And I'm like, so I, have a chat with them, give them some ideas. And I have the second one coming in the door. I'm like, okay, stop, people. I will happily help you, but now I'm going to start to do group coaching around this because but gosh, I got lucky because I have my own online learning system. I have a learning management system. I do virtual stuff all the time. I got lucky. I could pivot quite quickly. Right. Where I think now is the opportunity because of COVID, even when things happen and COVID isn't a thing, what can you do as a business to really think about delivery channels in a different way? Maybe for the next COVID, fine, but just as another way to look at sharing your story and educating and solving problems through distance, through going on site, through however those means possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And because so many people, they will need to be able to, or not that they need, but it's helpful to provide it in a different format so that people can't access it, because some people, even before COVID, they weren't able to necessarily meet with you in person. And so they would have to be able to find some way to do that. So yeah, I think those are really smart advice that you're offering to them.
And I think that's, to me, that's, again, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I think that's going to be the cool thing on the other side of COVID is that the ways we communicate, live, and work are going to be very different in a fantastic way. And I was just talking with one of my friends who's at a big pharma company, and he said, we're not even talking going back to the office until 2022. And I said, how do you feel about that? He's like, well, we were forced to engage and connect this way. And now it's actually kind of better because I'm seeing like little Zoom windows into people's actual lives versus the artifacts they'd have in their cubicle. And I'm able to really engage and talk to colleagues in London that I never really could before. And they're like, and I think that's the beautiful shift that will come out of this is a different way for us to connect with people via just going and sitting and having a coffee. I miss that greatly, but you know what? We now have some other tools in our arsenal to really foster connectedness that maybe we weren't thinking about before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And on all fronts, because I do miss seeing people in person, and the opportunities that have arisen this year of being able to connect with folks from all over the world. I mean, I was able to do it before, but it just seems like has become easier and more accepted. And I think people do appreciate how nice it is. And yeah, you're right that it is going to be, well, even though it's hurting the travel industry a bit, sure. and definitely with airlines, with like business travel. On the other hand, I know, like, for instance, my husband used to complain about, having to, travel sometimes for work, and just being able to just connect with people. Oh, I know. Yeah. Cause his company deal is overseas in Sweden. And so he'd be like, I don't understand why we would need to fly all the way over there when we can just connect via Zoom instead. And so now, of course, they're doing that, and they've realized the benefits of it, and in so many ways.
And that's, again, going back to effective leadership. I mean, one of the core competencies I talk about is building relationships. Well, you know what? That doesn't have to just be, let's have lunch or have a coffee or, a cocktail after work. We got different ways to do that now. And I talk about that actually in the book, which was very prophetic accidentally, that, not to discount the use of technology and things like a LinkedIn to connect with people, foster relationships. It still takes work, of course, but it doesn't have to stop you, or it's really expanding your opportunity to foster that connectedness, to be a more effective leader, and to foster and build that trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can still have lunch in a way, and you can still have a happy hour. I mean, I know early on when the lockdown happened, I had friends who would host, happy hours at 5:00, and it's like, everybody bring a glass of wine, and we're we're going to get dressed up, and it's okay. So we're in our bedrooms or our office or wherever, big deal, but we can still, be together. Separately. And so that works out. Is there anything else that you think is important that we should know about, maybe in particular about how that we haven't covered already that could help someone be a more inclusive leader?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I keep going back to the phrasing, think in, speak up, act out. So we talked about the act out, looking at your organization. Think in, of course, is about yourself. And if you're listening and you want to start to uncover your own potential unconscious biases, Google Project Implicit. It's an actual assessment you can do online for free, sponsored by Harvard and a couple other universities several years ago as a way to actually start to measure your potential unconscious bias. It's really cool. So that's kind of the think in. Really briefly, I'll talk about the concept of speak up. And so when I first started kind of creating this idea and putting it in my book, I was thinking about a story that it's actually a real life thing that happened to me in Atlanta several years ago. It was myself and one of my top doggers, which is what I call my consultants. Mm-hmm. We were closing out a project. And so we were in this conference room in Atlanta. All the project team was there. And we were just the two from my business. And we're just about to start. It was like, yay, we did the project. It was a change management project. We're like, yay, we're done. And just as the conversation's about to start, the senior executive, and it's a male, and that's important to the story, but he's at the head of the table. And just as the sound dies down, you hear him say, well, you know how all women drive. And everyone just kind of stopped and looked. And I'm being a child of the 80s. It was like a John Hughes film where the record goes, and everyone stopped. And so, but no one said a word at that specific moment. Now I'm about to say something, of course, because that's kind of what I do. And Lori kicks me under the table, my top dogger, and she's like, wait. And I love that she did that. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But at that exact moment in time, every single one of us, which I consider anybody a leader. You don't have to have formal reporting structure. It's you have influence, you're a leader. Mm-hmm. So every leader in that room was engaging what's called silent collusion with that senior executive who said that poopy remark. Mm-hmm. And silent collusion is when you don't stand up and refute those nasty, negative, stereotype engaging statements. And what I've seen in my leadership world is the most heartfelt leaders who accidentally or on purpose engage in silent collusion. Maybe they don't have the courage, there's like politics involved, whatever the reason, they undermine their own leadership effectiveness at that moment. Mm-hmm. Even if you've done so much awesomeness in the world, by not diffusing that horrible statement, you're engaging in silent collusion and you're eroding the trust that you've already built. Yeah. And so one of the things I talk about in my book is it's 6 ways that you can refute being in silent collusion. Like when that guy says that stupid remark, you say things like, well, Bob will be the executive. Bob, what did you mean by that? And again, watching the tone, not like, Bob, what did you mean by that? Right, yeah, but by me asking that, I'm sending 2 messages. One, I'm knocking Bob in the virtual head, and maybe he's operating from that unconscious bias, and he's like, oh, I didn't, which is kind of what happened here. But it's also sending a message about me as a leader that, you know what, that's not cool for me. I'm not going to just sit here and be silent. Mm-hmm. What happened in the rest of the story is, the reason Lori stopped me was she's like, I know you would say something, but we are leaving this corporate culture. I think it was important to see what they did. I'm like, you are a brilliant woman. Thank you. So that was the one thing. There was this gentleman sitting in the side of the room, and he was fairly new to the project. I think he just graduated from business school and joining the company. And he wasn't sitting even at the table. He was like on the chair against the wall. And the guy said the poopy remark, women drive. And he, dead silence, felt for like 20 minutes. It was only a few moments. Right. And then he just folded his hands and he went, damn. And you knew what he was thinking, didn't you? I mean, he was not on board with that comment. And that led the rest of the people to be like, yeah, Bob, what did you mean by that? So even just saying a non-word just lets people know that you're not on board. Maybe you have to physically remove yourself if that's appropriate. I know that's more in social settings. People like just move because they're like, hey, I don't really like the way this conversation's going. Boop. So I call it MOPSAM, MOPSAM. Those are the 6 ways that you can refute it. I use in my trainings and in the book, I use, have you ever seen a Hungarian pulley mop dog? Mm-hmm. Yeah. They look like if you stuck a stick on their back, you can mop your floor with them. They're called mop dog. Yeah. So the one I use is named Sam. So Sam's name and this breed, Mop Sam. And it's really cheeky and silly and stupid, but people remember it. There's those 6 things, Steve. I remember those, And so I think to kind of roundabout answer the question, a way to speak up as an inclusive leader is to make sure that you don't engage in silent collusion, that you find ways to refute those statements that's comfortable for you so that people don't assume that you're on board with that and erode that trust that you've already built up.
Yeah. That is wonderful advice because it is so frustrating. I to be able to, even just to watch that scenario come out, I can, because I can just feel, if I were a fly on the wall watching it and just going, oh man, really? Oh. And so that was cool that that one guy just at least made that comment to break the ice and to just kind of say hello.
Yeah, that's not appropriate.
Yeah.
And that also sent a message, to that gentleman's behalf. He's an ally to the women in the room, and that's great. That's fantastic, as he should be. Mm-hmm. And so, as it doesn't just have to be about a group against you, it could be really any group. And so people notice this. People take notes, and they put that in their noggin and say like, wow, Gloria stood up when they're saying smack about gay people. That's cool. Thank you, ally. And people remember that stuff, and that goes so far into fostering trust, especially when you're not the targeted group. You're that ally. Do that, because it's one, it makes the world a better place, but two, it's actually helping your own leadership street cred, because you're showing that you'll support anybody and really fostering that feeling of inclusivity for all.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. And it's something that I do strive to do, but I know I can always improve. And I think that's also important to know too, is that, we're still human, we're going to screw up, but as long as you can apologize, there's a concept, right?
Hey.
You do screw up, and just say, you'll do better next time. And that's all you can do, really.
Yeah. Great.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a joy to have you here, and I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom. And I love the mouse pad, because that's really good. Have all those handy. So awesome. So if you're, tell me again, there was the how to be able to speak, Gloria, the Harvard University website, or to be able to do that test, the assessment.
Yeah, I don't know the URL off the top of my head. You'd think I would after doing it for like 20 years.
Something to Google. If you Google, and I'll look it up and put it up in the show notes.
Yeah, if you Google Project Implicit. So you hear the concept of unconscious bias, implicit bias, hidden bias. They're all the same thing. So they use the term implicit bias. So Project Implicit, and I believe it's still at harvard.edu, but I forget the beginning of it.
All right. Good. Well, like I said, I'll make a point of finding it and put it in the show notes. So I'll make it easy. And so, which actually also brings me to, if someone wants to find out more about your organization, maybe wants to hire you to come in and talk with them and their employees and their leadership, what's the best place for people to reach out?
Yeah, it's real simple. TopDogLearning.biz, B-I-Z. If you accidentally put .com, it'll redirect you where you need to go. But we just picked biz, 15 years ago when we started the business. But that's the best way to get a hold of us. You'll be able to see, you actually can even get on my calendar for 15 minutes if you really want. And then we'll kind of direct you where you need to go. I usually put all podcasts and articles and all sorts of fun stuff that I have out there, as well as any free webinars that we do. You can also sign up for our mailing list so that you know when all these freebies happen. My focus is giving back to the world. Like, for example, I do a lot of work on, we didn't talk about it here, but resilience in times of change. I know you've had that topic on before. That's one of the things that I play in, pulling from my IBM consultant stuff. So I've been doing like free webinars for folks to be like, hey, here's the 3 things you can do to be resilient right now. And so we do stuff like that as a way to foster a better world. So if you sign up for TopDogLearning.biz, and you'll find the contact us kind of thing, sign up for our website, feel free to, and we'd love to see you and help make the world a little bit more inclusive for all.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. And again, I will have that in the show notes as well, just in case you're listening somewhere and you're, in your car or whatnot. So we'll have that. But this has been great. And I really appreciate you being here today. And good luck with keeping things inclusive and
thanks.
And spreading that pride leadership.
And thank you for what you do, Gloria. I think it's so important to have this opportunity for positivity in the world. So thank you for this. I think it's awesome.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And so thank you out there who's listening and are watching on YouTube. I appreciate you. And in closing, as usual, I encourage you to go out there and to live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically.